morning. This is the Focus on Parliament show on Civic Space TV, brought to you by the Center for Constitutional Governance. I am Kwagala. On today's program, we spotlight, review, and analyze the major events in Parliament in the year ending 2023. We also take a sneak peek into what we should expect in the new year 2024 in line with the Parliament's mandate. Now, joining me to make a sense and have a discussion on the topic, which is a reflection of 2023 in Parliament, is a panel consisting of distinguished personalities whom I now have the pleasure and honor to introduce to you, our esteemed viewership. I'll start right next to me on my left, a senior citizen and a very distinguished politician. I do not know whether it sits right if I introduce you as the president of the UPC, Mr. Ochieno Joseph.
One of the leaders of UPC.
One of the leaders of UPC.
That's good. Thank you.
You're most welcome, sir.
A pleasure.
Then we have Miss Winfred Mugambwa. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much.
There is Mr. Lawel Muhwezi. Lawel Muhwezi and I share quite a lot. We share common history. I think going way back to our university days at Makerere. So he's a person that I've known for now quite a decade, almost a decade.
That's a disclaimer. Yeah?
Yes, I am happy to be back, really. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us. Let me start with you, Mr. Joseph. What do you consider as the key highlight for you in Parliament this year? Just briefly.
Highlight?
Yes.
So that's one major highlight?
Yes.
Of course, it's the anti-homosexuality legislation, which ironically was substantially rushed. Ironically, it seemed to have been one in which particularly the governing group, NRA, would suggest that it's a matter that came from the opposition, not themselves. They're quite right, because Basalirwa, Honorable Mr. my good brother from Bujiri, is the one who tabled it as a private member's bill. But it's interesting how it got a sense of unanimity in the Legislative Assembly. And then so therefore we wonder why and how. People have theorized onto why, including possibly that he may have been enabled to run with this legislation. But more importantly is, while it is the case that it was fairly popular in the National Assembly, and while it's the case that it's a legislation which no doubt is about a matter which is emotive in this country, and so therefore you'd see the issues at stake are fairly very popular. And while that is also representative and reflective of the state, if like, when it comes to same-sex issues and relations, is an emotive issue on the African continent. I just wonder why it then all of a sudden in 2023, it became the biggest, most important thing that it wasn't in 2021, 22, or 2019, and why it became the biggest life or death thing in the Republic of Uganda, when actually we have Karamoja Street children. And when this has been quickly passed as a legislation, and nobody, at least I don't know, how many people were scientifically presented as at risk of this in the absence of this legislation this year. And so all it is therefore that the National Assembly presented itself as an organ of the state that is easily gullible and usable by the executive. And in this case, it is very clearly the case that, in my opinion, the executive picked it and ran with this very particular legislation, partly maybe to blackmail Western Europe and North America, the global North, partly maybe to grandstand, and partly maybe to dare, particularly in the US, knowing very well that it is suggested that the US president had several conversations with Mr. Museveni on this matter, and Mr. Museveni went over and above and ran with this thing, and the outcome now is sanctions which I think are very mild, targeted to a few individuals. I think they're just basically a touch of a little naughty boy, comrade young Mr. Museveni will teach you, because if it were the case that it should be about real sanctions, should be more than that. So that legislation, in my opinion, remains, and at the moment it's under test. In fact, there is in court there is a challenge going on, and we are waiting for that. And when I look back to a whole year of a major event in the National Assembly, and I ask myself why we had to spend that huge amount of time and energy and focus on it, including adhering our international relations. Mr. Museveni and his team have suggested, fairly conveniently and possibly rightly, as I said, on the basis of the motions of the people, that look, this is a vice which is Western and is not Ugandan, and our sovereignty is being threatened by these guys imposing, hence the link to sanctions. Sanctions were suggested and has been imposed not because of the legislation alone, but it's simply because of the legislation and many other issues, including huge, horrendous human rights abuses by this regime, including the killings against Ugandans, following the 2021 elections, the disappearances and brutal torture, and in many cases, I know even today, before coming to the studios, I know of somebody who lost a brother who eventually died after being kidnapped and tortured following those elections, and then comes out of these torture chambers and died sort of a year later. So these are the things. And then on the other hand, attack on civil society organizations, including stopping local civil society organizations to be part of those elections, 2011 elections, attack on the media, including on media networks, and massive corruption. And so the US guys listed all these other things. But it was argued conveniently that you take us back to that legislation. But since that legislation is the focus of the state, I thought I would make it like that. And since that legislation is also the focus of the state, then I say a whole National Assembly, rather too big a National Assembly, Parliament of over 500 people, very expensive Parliament, and many of them eating rather a lot of money unnecessarily, your money and my money. How couldn't these guys see that the timing was suspect, and that the implications in terms of whatever they came out with was suspect, and then means therefore that 2023, I wonder, are these legislators, this very expensive lot of men, and some young men, women that I thought were sensible men, because I'm not saying they're not, they could see that this was something which was not going to impact now on the image of our country, and the livelihood of our people, while behind that, there is the major Mabati scandal, where a thieving group of NRA guys who are legislators and in parliament, including presiders of that assembly, were named, and they're now walking freely in the streets of Kampala. So for that, I found that the most exciting, most interesting.
We'll return to you, Mr. Joseph. The Anti-Homosexuality Act is a very sensitive and polarizing subject in Uganda today. But I want to understand just briefly, Ms. Winfred, what has been your major highlight in Parliament for their ending?
Only one?
No, you could elaborate.
I thank you so much.
But what has stood out for you?
What has stood out for me?
Yes, majorly.
I like the braveness of the opposition on the issue of the abduction. I love that discussion, because when you see at the time when the ministers came out with a report to defend the government, the rejoinder from the opposition, to me, I saw that government being stripped naked. Yes. Shame. That report, the rejoinder showed that our government is not serious. Not someone getting you naked from your report. Yeah, so that really stood out for me. I love the braveness of the leader of opposition. I love the time they spent, the time they spent out of the parliament. They're like sticking on their agenda. Like, we need to know. There are 7 points. They were like, we need to know about their demands. We are not coming back until government answers. So that boldness, if our country, many other legislatures, many other MPs get that boldness, to me, it would be going somewhere. Then he has already talked about the Anti-Homosexuality Act now. Of course, that discussion stood out for me. How? First of all, up to now, I still wonder how, since it's already an act, even before being an act, before even the discussions going on, the speaker said they were having evidences of teachers from Budo. You get it? You get it? She even mentioned the space. So to me, I was like, those would have been the first. Our discussions would have started from there. Yes? To today, I don't think any Ugandan has ever seen that evidence from the speaker. They showed us the evidence is there. They mentioned the school. They said a lot of words, but evidence wasn't there. Then they pushed in. But why did that discussion amuse me so much? Because in January, we were having a discussion around NSSF saga, where we found, where the report found out that two ministers, the finance minister and then the minister of gender, were mentioned to be part of the scandals. Yes. However much they defended themselves, but of course, when you read, when you hear, you feel it that okay, yes. And again, other MPs like 3 to 6 were also mentioned in the report, and then we were still there handling the issue of NSSF, and then also the issue of Mabatan goats came in. Almost many MPs were involved. Many ministers were involved. We don't know where it ended. So to me, why that conversation and now the Anti-Homosexuality Act stands out for me, and I really need to understand. I even ask Ugandans, we need not to just jump on things, because I believe the speaker was like, now he was already also caught in the Mabati saga. Then they had to bring in something to divert. To me, I feel the Anti-Homosexuality Act, then the bill, was brought in to distract us Ugandans who are now asking for accountability, who are now opening our eyes. Okay, personally, I have money in NSSF. That is why I was interested so much in that in my money, part of my money. Where has it been going? Yes, the leaders are eating, very many things. So I was so much interested in. Then the Mamati saga comes in. Personally, I'm a woman activist, a woman human rights defender, and I believe in women being the leader. So when a saga comes on board and a woman is in a lead of a saga, I get interest of it, because I believe women, we've been so much under patriarchy. People have been putting us down. So when a woman is up there, I feel they are the persons who have to feel more for this country. Yes. And when I see them in such sagas, yes, some of them are caught, are just caught unaware, but again, I get more interest. And again, the what? That is when the anti-homosexuality bill was brought in. And now, every time of recent, when Bobby Wine mentions the 100 million, that also got me to open my eyes more. When the speaker was coming out to defend or even fire back to Bobby Wine, she didn't say, no, we didn't get the 100 million. So in my head, I'm like, did they receive the money? She's only telling Bobby Wine, stop speaking what you don't know. Yes, we are paid because of the work we do. Yes, she's denying being paid that money for passing the supplementary budget. Yes, but she's not saying that we didn't get the money. So me as a citizen who sits this one says, I'm here questioning myself, okay? So when that debate became hot, you saw where they ran. They ran back to the Anti-Homosexuality Act. So it's like they're here to confuse us. That act is here to confuse us. I mean, it's an MP from Soroti. Soroti is one of the areas where at least in a week, not less than 3 women die of violence. Yes, and a minister, a member of parliament from Soroti West stands up. They're talking about issues of that money. He stands up and says, personally, I am ready to shed blood to fight homosexuals. You get it? When the same MP can't shed blood for women who are dying in his constituency. Yes, to me, those discussion is also another discussion that I'm so much interested in. Why is it that every issue that comes in Parliament, yes, when someone stands up and then brings in the aha, and we get diverted.
Thank you, Winfred.
Yeah,
Let me bring in Lawel. Lawel, you are a keen observer of the political events in the country. Winfred urges here rather strongly that the passage of the Anti-Homosexuality Act was motivated by the need to deflect from then the more pressing, issues that were, being pushed by the public in the country, especially with regards to human rights and then political accountability. In your view, what has stood out for you in Parliament for the year ending 2023?
One, I hope you can allow me just respond slightly on the anti-homosexuality bill. So there's what we call rationalization, that you look at because something leads to something, and then you say perhaps that's why we arrive at that conclusion. So it could be that the Anti-Homosexuality Act or bill had an effect of diverting people from what was trending at the time. But I don't believe that that was the very reason as to why it cropped up in the first place. I also think that the discussion around the schools that they said were having cases of homosexuality was what was used, or perhaps what triggered the discussion on homosexuality. I disagree with my colleagues to say that you can use the Anti-Homosexuality Act to measure democracy or inclusiveness, because I can say that the issue with the homosexuality, by its very nature, being an emotional subject, people are passionate, and that its proximity to people is very urgent. It's easy for people to have a say against anti-homosexuality and even support it without consideration of the long-term effects, especially the economic, like the backlash from the US. So that's why for me, I think it is, we can say that even if consultations were made on anti-homosexuality, I think you'd have similar opinion. You can walk on the streets. So if it's about inclusivity and the result being a reflection on what the general population wants, I think they would pass that bill. I think what must be disputed is that we expect better from the MPs themselves in terms of having a nuanced discussion. That even if this is the popular opinion, they must go ahead to analyze on its geopolitical implications. I think for me that's where the issue is, that the nature, the level of discussion in Parliament around anti-homosexuality was only driven on the premise of passion rather than looking at the geopolitical realities. But for me, what really stood out was, one, the Computer Misuse Act, two, the human rights report discussion that has been discussed. For me, why those two are outstanding is that they touched the bottom of human rights, of freedoms, and that what has our society so far appreciated insofar as what they deserve as human beings or not. So the discussion on Computer Misuse Act went to the bottom of the right to, the freedom of speech. To what extent can we limit it? To what extent can we not? What is the role of the law in terms of privacy? To what extent can it encroach on my privacy and what not? And that even the idea of the human rights violations, abductees, is that regardless of the political party where you belong, is that it is an issue of human rights, and that to what extent can we discuss the right of an individual beyond political parties? That can the discussion sink to that level that these people they don't deserve to be tortured because they're human beings, not because they're NUP? That for me, those two interrogated to what extent our society, not just MPs, has appreciated the concept of rights. And that for me, if members of parliament, if our society has not understood that the reason why you shouldn't be tortured is not because you're NRM or NUP, that in the first place, you are a human being. You get? And so for me, they are telling to what extent we have transformed. Because once people don't appreciate that they are deserving of these human rights, they cannot agitate or even hold accountable government based on its performance whether the levels of democratic or accountability or provision of health services, it starts from people appreciating that as citizens or as human beings, they deserve these things. So if they can't appreciate that, it becomes very difficult for us to have a bigger discussions on to what extent is government performing. Because government's performance is premised on to what extent citizens can participate in its formation, but also in holding it accountable.
Thank you, Lawel. Mr. Joseph, let us examine the question of the Anti-Homosexuality Act, rather more, in a detailed fashion. So, when this act was passed, it triggered a lot of revulsion from the international community, especially the Western Bloc. And these are countries that have that have had a long-standing partnership with the Ugandan state in terms of trade relations and also certain aspects of governance. Now, as we understand today, the impact of that was to inject Uganda from the AGOA, forum of countries in partnership with the United States. But also, as recently as I think 2 weeks ago, we've seen the US government churning out a range of sanctions targeting individuals in Uganda who in its judgment, it says they are responsible for passing such a draconian and very, discriminatory law. Lawel was arguing for, the ignorance of the MPs, their lack of awareness in passing the law, which not taking into consideration the full weight of the geopolitical implications. Should we take it that, that should transcend over the sovereignty of a country in considering laws to be passed? What's your view?
I don't know where Lawel and I would disagree, because his submission ended up being precisely what I was talking about. So unless part of what is contention here is the quality of legislators we have, and this is focus on Parliament debate, I am saying, and I think indeed Winfred too seems to suggest, that we are saying that common sense ought to have prevailed, meaning that they must have anticipated. I actually asked that what is it, how urgent, it reminds me of Tony Blair, and I was then lucky to have been a chairman of the parliamentary constituency Labour Party in Britain, when Blair was trying to ask support for the Labour members of parliament to support him and his George Bush's friends war in Iraq. And so these are the conversations we're having. And Blair had to make a forceful submission on the floor of the House. And so did my poor elder brother, General Colin Powell in America as the Secretary of State, to make this thing about the urgency that, well, if we don't take this action, within 45 minutes, the world will be blown, kind of stuff. What was massively that so urgent about anti-homosexuality legislation? That was our question. So I think the three of us here all in concert that, evidence suggests that there was nothing. And if anything, we're saying, as Winfred says, what is it if it is a school in Budo with their teachers and possibly students? What since then to date, now we have a legislation. How many of these people have gone for? I also want to tell you, and I didn't really want to say this at the beginning of the conversation. Do you know the people, this regime, is the worst regime to push for some anti-homosexuality legislation. Check your documents and possibly check Hansard. NRA soldiers under Mr. Museveni, under this regime, NRA men raped Acholi men in northern Uganda, substantially documented and filmed and recorded on record. None of those NRA guys have been apprehended. None of their commanders have been apprehended. None of their political leaders in terms of ministers have been apprehended. Their commander-in-chief, permanent commander-in-chief is Mr. Museveni. He's not been apprehended, nor has he held and responded to this. It is possibly these Acholi men who needed to have been terribly scared that unless we legislate, there will be another room of these guys coming over. None of that has actually happened. So now we are saying this was purely opportunistic. So in other words, therefore, what Winfred is saying, the timing was suspect. In fact, because you asked me for one, I didn't want to go to a shoot. The timing was suspect. By and large, it was a diversion, and that's why I said, well, it's interesting, and it could actually be argued against our argument that, well, it's Basalirwa who an opposition legislator, but we know how NRA works, and it's up to Basalirwa, my good brother, to Hassan Asuman, to come and say, look, I did it thoroughly and very independently. But part of the argument is this, that even if Basalirwa had actually done so independently, legislators, including the whips of NRA, ought to have seen that possibly this is not the most urgent thing. In any case, we're having Madbati issues, and in any case, we're having NSSF issues, and in any case, we have Karamoja Street kids, and in any case, it has got political implications for us, that we may not necessarily be enjoying good relations with our friends in Anglo-America if we went ahead and did this move. I have argued elsewhere that in the status book, there are provisions, constitutional provisions, in the status to be able to mitigate this. And so, in other words, we did not need legislation to deal. It needed legislation to deal with the question of Budo teachers and Budo students. And in any case, we did not need those legislations to deal with any challenges of homosexuality. And three, most importantly, NRA has been in power for 37 years. That is possibly much older than you are. At what stage, which year in the league did this homosexuality act and threat sneak into the Republic of Uganda without them seeing? Was it 1986? What is 1989? Was it 2001? Was it suddenly 2017? Uganda was a very calm country and sneaked in 2021, and all of a sudden there's this crude homosexuality acts and activities taking place in schools. Bang, guys, we have to take action. No, it wasn't. I think that legislators in our National Assembly ought, whatever matter is brought to the table, and that's what we're saying, whatever matter it is, by the time it comes to Parliament, ideally this should be matters that political parties ought to have been having conversations of and with. And indeed, if these conversations have taken place, you realize that actually the arguments that have been made that we've had homosexuals in our communities since time immemorial, and possibly there is no evidence that a homosexual in Nyabushozi is a threat to Museveni's family, and that a homosexual somewhere in Bujiri is a threat to Asuman, that a homosexual somewhere in Luwero is a threat to the other gentleman from Nakaseke. That by and large is not necessarily that. But yes, that is a vice that all of us are opposed to. And that's why I'm trying to say that, well, I want to know how these men, particularly Acholi men, were raped. Because without prejudice, sex as consensual sex in a private space, in a private and private space, is neither here nor there, whatever sex, whatever mode. And in this case, if it is a rape, however consensual, whatever nature of sex which is forced as rape is criminal, is abhorrent, it is terrible. Rape, But in this case, we are talking about homosexual sex, and it's this terrible. But imagine homosexual rape, especially homosexual rape when there is no evidence that those actually men were homosexuals anyway. Can you imagine how crude, repugnant it is? Just think about it. There's hypocrisy going on. There is some false game going on in this country. And so, for that matter, NRA must take responsibility for whatever the consequences that we are facing with this. And since we are having a conversation over Parliament, we are saying these guys are paid huge amount of money. For sure, let it be the case that come next year and any time in future, any matter that comes to the floor of Parliament, that ought to be legislators, part of the statutes should be things which are matters of urgency, and homosexuality, neither here nor there. Popular emotive has actually been said, because as I said, it's an emotive issue. These guys, generally it's quite unpopular on the African continent. Mr. Museveni knew that it was one of the best things to run with. So now I am your savior, or else, because if we don't do it, your community is gone. You know what? I am not quite sure that, as I said, that the biggest threat to the livelihood of people in Gongera is homosexuality. No, it's not. The biggest threat is motor accidents. The biggest threat is the terrible absence of facilities in terms of health. Good examples, Soroti has been given. The biggest threat actually is absence of sufficient provision for young children in education, people who will be like you to reach university levels with yourselves and to compete with Indian children when we are prepared to go to the moon in the next 20 years. These are very, very urgent things, whereas the outcomes in 20 years...
The president and several members of parliament argue that, you know, the homosexuals are recruiting young children into this sordid, you know, moral activity.
That's exactly what...
And it has far-reaching implications on the health, the social health of the country.
No, that is what Winfred said. If they're recruiting, let them gather the evidence, you know, and prosecute, number one. And how many have they prosecuted thus far? Number one. Number two, if they were doing it at the time, they did not need fresh legislation. And number three, if they're recruiting, you know, today, as I said, I want to go back to Acholi. They're recruiting young people into this vice. Who are these other people that NRA security does not know? And number two, if they're recruiting for voluntary homosexual sex, which is repugnant anyway, you know, what about those ones who had sex by force called rape, where they under their NRA and their Mr. Museveni's commanders?
Winfred, let me come to you. Article 79 lays out the broad mandate of Parliament in a constitutional democracy like Uganda. There is a component of accountability. We want to interrogate that further. In Parliament this year, we've witnessed a major scandal, the now infamous Mabat scandal. That scandal had you know, high-ranking officials of government at all levels, including the Speaker, the Prime Minister, then I think 1 or 2, 3 state ministers, including the one for finance, and even by extension, the other members of Parliament. They were all adversely implicated in that evil scheme. What could be your assessment of, you know, the Parliament's capacity to fight corruption?
How can you fight what you are? They are corrupt themselves. How can they fight? They were the people. You've just mentioned names. The Speaker, the head of Parliament, was part of the scandal. Yes? So how can you expect me to fight corruption when I'm corrupt?
Fight yourself.
How can you expect me to fight myself? And how would that battle be? Of course, the battle would be like how it is.
And the chief whip, who's supposed to be the cleanser in the team involved. And Minister for Finance, who's actually in charge of your pocket money.
So, which kind of... we are giving Parliament a very big task. Of course, by the time they're elected, they know it's one of the things they're supposed to do. We expect, as a voter, I expect my MP to do a lot of work around accountability, to speak on my behalf. But given that the majority have already been, I think, personally, I feel they've already laid their feet in the corruption. So there is no way, it's hard for them to remove that feet or to hold others accountable. Yet they've not yet. Yes, was it yesterday or yesterday but one, when they were talking about the cooperative, the fraud around the cooperatives?
Yes.
And then the speaker told the MP of Nakaseke to report to the police. I think I haven't yet gone deeper into that scandal, but I think that MP was mentioned somewhere. And this is a speaker who is asking another MP to go and report themselves to police, given that their names are already mentioned. But remember, she didn't report to the police.
Herself. When she was implicated in the
I remember her saying,
scandal.
I am not going to go. She broadly said, I love the boldness. I love women who are very bold. But I hate when the boldness is misleading us. Yes? When we are having leaders who are misleading us, which means we are going to fall into a trap. Yes? I love the boldness of the speaker. I love bold women. But her boldness is misleading. If she couldn't go to the police when she was in the scandal of Mabati, you get? So every time the Parliament will stand up to speak about accountability, in my view, they'll end up failing somewhere because they've already been held or fallen into very many scandals of accountability. I told you of this kind of NSSF, the Minister of Finance, because NSSF, I don't know whether now they resorted to what the recommendation were in the report, to leave NSSF to report to only one ministry, the finance, instead of the two. But remember, the same finance person is still the same person there. Yes? When they told the Minister of Gender to resign, she said, I'm not resigning. Yes? But remember, her name was mentioned somewhere. And it is a full page, not even a page is not enough. Remember the scandal around the IGG, that there is another scandal around there, still in the parliament, and other ministers, but they all sit on the floor of parliament. There is no way they will be accountable or hold other people accountable, yet they can't hold themselves accountable.
Lawel.
And I needed to first, a small thing, I needed to add on something small on what Joseph had said. When you asked Joseph around the question of recruitment, personally, I believe when we bring such laws, the country is already threatened with security. There are very many violences, which means we are just fueling other violences. Okay, when we say that people have been recruiting or even raping or even defiling young people, by bringing this law, we are saying even those who have been raped or defiled are going to go quiet. Because first of all, in them, that is what they feel. They feel they are gay. And yes, I'm gay and another gay man raped me. By going to police to report, it is either me to choose to be rehabilitated and stop being gay. But yet, me, that is what I feel. It means I will not go and report. But if the laws in place speak to reporting rape, defilement, any violence, regardless of anyone's sexuality, it means we are now going to fight the different violences in place. But this kind of laws, even if the AHA is going to only keep people in silence and have more people violated. By today, if you read the different reports that are put out, the different violations in place within the months, over 800 cases of violence. Is it where we want to go?
Can I just, if you don't mind, I think it's very, very important. Winfred, you need to emphasize this because I know it's the focus on Parliament, so the predominant consumers of this program will be reasonably informed people. But I think let's not make assumptions. Part of what Winfred is saying, and it's part of my own experience is global on many of these issues, particularly on violence and on gender violence.
Yeah.
There is actually substantial evidence to suggest that victims, particularly victims of rape, and mainly predominantly women victims of rape. Don't forget there's also male victims of rape, but that victims of sexual violence and particularly victims of rape, that they tend to feel, scientifically proven, that it's predominantly their faults. And in many cases, they withdraw into silence and they go into some other ways of living, in many cases through different kind of traumas, including they normally, the basic tend to withdraw rather than to come up. So it's got implications. But I thought I would just say that as a by the by. And because we are discussing this within this context, people should not take it as a headline. It's a very important thing that has been founded. Yes.
Thank you for your perspective. Lawel, on the question of accountability, we have witnessed in the wake of the Mabati scandal, the predominant sentiment of Ugandans was rather interesting. This time round, cynically, they commented that, they had resigned to the corruption, unabated, large-scale corruption in government, but they were rather surprised that, this time round, people could stoop too low to the extent of stealing Mabati. Mabati meant for the,
the poorest of the poor.
The poor, Kalimajong in the north, who for all their circumstances, the obvious circumstances, and
In fact, mentioned Marat and goats.
Mm.
Only goats, just people don't talk about the
Yeah.
goats. There were also goats. It wasn't only
Yeah.
Marat.
so for their deplorable situation, people found it rather, surprising. What's your take on the question of accountability, especially since it's a core constitutional role of Parliament?
So-
Are you satisfied?
So I think that we need to expound on Mabati, not just look at Mabati for what it is. It is just a behavior that because of continued corruption, that people get used to.
Yeah.
So if it is iron sheets that you can take to my church, you can take to my constituency.
Yeah.
It's behavioral. It becomes part
It's
of
now
them.
normal.
They learn to. They forget that they have a duty
Yeah.
to put to use whatever is given to them for the right purpose. And so whether it starts with big money or it comes to Mabati or it is food, they think that because they're in charge, I will call, hey, Prime Minister, the iron sheets, come and pick them, take them. It's a cobweb. It's
Culture impunity
yes,
of the
it
sort.
becomes part of how they look at service generally. I think what you are saying and about accountability, it is that in any aspect, if your hands are not clean, like you lose the moral advantage or leverage for it to hold any other person accountable. And so if you don't have the moral compass to hold anyone, you have been stealing, you can't be the one saying people should not steal. So you abdicate that legitimacy to ask for accountability. But for me, really, you want to understand this parliament, just watch it. Tune on UBC or any other station and watch it. Look at the verbal and the non-verbal cues and see the casual nature with which they conduct business, and you'll know to what extent do they take their position serious, their duty serious, and also to what extent they take their citizens serious. It's casual. My friend withdraw. This boy, this is your colleague. It's like it's as if you're conducting
Their
family
personal
business. And for that is very telling to what extent do they take their mandate serious. And so quite often we want to look at policies. Why did this money end that? But I have a background in psychology, and I know that you don't need to go all that way. Just look at how they are behaving, how they're conducting business. It is telling to what extent. And so I recently, and for me, when it was really evident was when the leader of opposition was giving a response to the government report. And you could see they don't take it serious. They think it is a personal thing. They think it is, Honorable Mpuga is my friend, is my colleague. They don't understand what they're doing. I think for me, the problem with that is that it affects, because for me, I am patient and I'm thinking as a young person that it is possible for this country to get back on track after this. We can somehow get rid of this regime. But I feel that we are going to inherit something that is badly off, because democracy exists on those three arms of government. But the more Parliament misuses its power or it does things that are not up to standard, the more they are challenged by court. What means is that the power play is that they continuously lose their power, the effect. I don't know if you're getting that. For example, look at with Zake's case, look at Computer Misuse Act. So it continuously looks as though the judiciary is the protector of citizens' interests, and the parliament, which is supposed to defend those interests, is not doing its job. What that means is that government, when parliament's power reduces, it can no longer check the executive and the judiciary. It becomes easy for executive to step on it, and becomes easy for court to continuously undermine its legislation. And for me, then it means that you also don't want to inherit a country where parliament, which is the direct representation of the people, does not yield power. I also wanted to say something to her, especially to people who are passionate about women. So usually people want to say, oh, she's at the top of parliament and she's doing badly, and they want to make it a women thing. I think it is really unfair to the women movement. I think we need to start also to have individual responsibility, that to understand that she's doing it not because she's a woman, but because of her individual.
No, she's doing it because of her bad manners,
Exactly.
not because of a woman. She's just bad manners.
Exactly.
And if you don't mind, I actually think that was part of the emphasis that Win was making. And actually, she put it in a very powerful way that, look, we are women folks that would like to be able to succeed. But sister, you're being very terrible. But anyway.
I think that extra layer it's very sensitive because there are people who have not yet appreciated women that just like a man are capable of everything that anyone can do. And so it's easier for them to say, look, we have empowered women. But if you look at the number of people who are involved in Mabati, you have a prime minister, a speaker, and say, women have not provided a good alternative. So I think it's important to always put an extra analysis on why the individual variables that affect how someone turns out to be, and that they are not a reflection. And it should be bold enough to say what she does is not a representation of the future of women in this country we envisioned, right? Because for me, when I continuously watch Parliament and the casual mode and the disrespect not of men but of colleagues of Parliament, for me it rubs me wrong that there are people who have fought for women to access these spaces, and you have one who is abusing their efforts. And so, but for me, just to wrap it up.
So you think it's just about a manifestation of the environment, and she's basically net victim?
Can I say something around there?
Please.
I think you didn't get me right. That is why I mentioned names. The Parliament has very many people. That is why I openly said the speaker. Yes. And me, I said, because I love women to be in positions, I love women to grow. That is why I said, when I see a woman, I feel bad. Of course, as a woman, I feel bad for where we are coming from, and I feel bad that a woman is doing that. But for example, before I go to the speaker, let me give an example of Honorable Sarah Opendi. Yes, of recent, who in course she calls it my bill, when she said women who are around marital rape, women who are raped in their bedrooms, they shouldn't bring their matters in my bill. You get it? It is her. Yeah. It is her not feeling. It is her not feeling for other women. It is not a women issue, not feeling for other women. So when we are talking about women, the speaker, Honorable Anite Among, her behavior, the way she speaks to other people, it is, to me, that is bad manners. You can't speak to other elder persons like that because you're the speaker, and now it becomes a women issue that women speak badly, women are arrogant. No, it is Anita, Honorable Anita, the speaker, who is arrogant. It is Honorable Anita who was involved in the what? My issue was women, the women who have fought. So, there are women who came before us who have done. That is why I feel when a woman does that, she is not looking at the women who have done what? Who have fought hard to see that women are in those spaces. It is another question I always ask myself. If people are given these positions, what are the criteria? Yes? Of course, right now we are talking about the Parliament.
In the context of Parliament?
Yeah, now today the debate is around Parliament. When they are choosing the speaker, what is the criteria of having that speaker there? Yes? Of the other women who were available, was this woman? Because we believe, I'm not saying she's not perfect to be there, but maybe she needed more mentorship, or maybe she needed, because truth is, her actions are her actions, not women actions. And she needs to be held accountable. A minister like other, now, right, let me give an example of Honorable...
Are you suggesting that she's incompetent for the position that she
Am
holds?
I suggesting?
Yes, that the speaker is not competent enough.
Can I get to that later?
For that position.
Can I get later?
Please.
I was giving an example of, you gave an example of the Prime Minister. She is a woman, and I love it that we have a woman in that position. Yes? But her actions are not for women. When she's involved in different scandals, she's involved there as Hannah Banja, not as a woman. There are also women with bad manners. Sometimes also women do wrong. We are not saying we are perfect. But again, when a woman does wrong and is in that position, we need to speak about it. I don't have to come here and just say that, yes, women are few. Maybe they are doing that because of the other force. Yes, there are some things they do because of the force. You saw how the Mabati saga, when only Honorable Nagudi, she Nagudi? Nandutu was in prison. Yes? Was she the only one in Mabati? But because of, and yes, there are some times when they are held captives of a circumstance. But again, we are not going to say, women, women movement, women are doing this. No. If it's Winfred who has done something wrong, yes, Winfred, you are a woman activist, you are a woman feminist, you are a feminist, but Winfred, you have bad manners, you have stolen, Winfred, you have done this. So,
Winfred, before you take leave of that matter in 30 seconds, do you think the speaker is sufficiently qualified and competent to perform the mandate of our office?
if it was me and I was asked an honest opinion, and they asked me, do you think, I'm just trying to phrase your question, do you think the speaker,
In your heart of hearts,
yes,
as
do
a
you think
Ugandan
the
citizen,
speaker needs to first go for mentorship? Yes, I would say yes.
she should take a refresher
Yes,
course.
I would, yes.
Very diplomatic
And
approach.
maybe if she can do it when she's still in that position, well and good for her. Because the way she's acting, no.
To build better capacity for
I remember that time when she
future deployment.
insulted the Anthony Geno. Who does
Deputy
that?
Attorney General, yeah.
Lawel, you conclude.
Yeah. So I think what I was saying is actually what she has done. That voice of clarity should be louder. For me, what is resoundingly clear is that we have a parliament that has a majority that don't understand their role and are not competent, and bold enough to say they're not competent, because quite often we mix up qualified in terms of having minimum qualifications and being competent enough. Because when you look at all the legislations, even those that are good, is that they don't go under serious debate and analysis to look at their implications, whether it is anti-homosexuality, whether it's computer misuse, whether it was, I think, petroleum supply amendment bill, where they gave, I think, monopoly.
Yeah.
Is that the discussion is on pros and cons of it, but there's minimal analysis on what the trend has been, where government institutions are given monopoly over things and how over a stretch of time they have performed. So that we don't have discussions that go to that extent. So what we have continuously is that a parliament that does not have the competence from its leadership to the normal backbenchers understanding the weight of their duty. I don't know if it's because of, is it turnover, the fact that most of them don't come back, or that our envelope, the sample space of our country, the people that are voted are just not competent, of which that would be a problem, because we need to reimagine our education system, our societal engineering and all that. But that's how I feel when you look at how Parliament has performed this year and continuously. It is a house that has majority that don't understand the magnitude of their role and don't have the competences.
Mr. Joseph.
He's saying that it's possibly very high schoolish, high school debate-ish, as it were. I have suggested before that 60% of legislators, I was not talking about this parliament, 60% of legislators in this country would fail to score pass mark, whatever that mark is, for a written essay on the role
Of a legislator?
Of a legislator. Not that you go and Google, tick, 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 but a role of a legislator. I am very serious about that. I've said it several times. I've said it actually once.
That's a serious charge.
Indeed. And once the elections
charge.
were done, Jacob Olanye was still alive and around, and leading to the elections of speakers that saw Olanye, I reiterated that. Following the death of my good brother Jacob, I had this similar conversation in another network. I still sort of hold that. But I must put a disclaimer. I've got many friends in this assembly, many members of parliament who are my good friends, and most of them are fantastically decent people. I think in nuance, part of the early conversation was about the state of this nation state, including the polity and indeed the governance And so Lawel was talking in about the pot, from where it comes. It in part may be about the pot, but it's quite clearly a case about the national character of our polity. But three, the absence of political leadership holistically. And three, in my opinion, it's also very much about the death of leadership in political parties and organizations. And so finally, of course, then critically, the death of institutions, including political parties and their own internal systems. Meaning, therefore, that when you come to elections, I look at Uganda People's Congress, and I've said so, and I'll say it again, that in the very likely event that at any time I am formally the leader of Uganda People's Congress, that the process of selection for people who become members of parliament in various constituencies to go and represent UPC, first of all, even consideration of primaries, but certainly people who go through primaries to become candidates for UPC will have to be top-notch people. Granted, I'm pleased to say that in many cases, UPC leaders always merge top generally anyway, and that's without prejudice. But there is something else. The death of political genuine polity, where politics has now been monetized, and particularly the fact that NRA has now so substantially dominated politics in this country, and the fact that this thing is now politics of patronage. And you know, the majority of the National Assembly is controlled by NRA, basically meaning Museveni's boys and girls. Many of the people, anyway, who end up in those positions don't actually qualify merely even as candidates because of evidence of competence as candidates, but patronage, yes, guys, to Mr. Museveni, or people who know Mr. Museveni, his brother, his wife, his in-law, or strategically located in NRA, or people who would have made some good money by whatever means. And now, as a friend was saying, oh no, the former Nigerian presidential candidate, Peter Obi, who said that on this continent, it's very typically Ugandan, that people in politics are the millionaires and the entrepreneurs have got less. So people go into politics to make more money than entrepreneurs in the streets of Kampala. So it's a business. So people with money will go in down there to make a lot
Did
of
he
money.
make the actual reference to Uganda?
Interestingly, he did not, but he's very precise because Uganda and Nigeria are actually twin brethren on a number of issues, including sometimes on corruption. But what is important generally about that is this, that where systems stabilize, Winfred, that you go through, and that's my experiences elsewhere, you go through a process of institutions like, look at the two of you guys, to be very precise. You know, you guys who emerged out of actually universities and colleges, and you're actually deep. I'm very impressed by both you guys, you know, in terms of analysis of these issues. And I'm not patronizing this program, you know, genuinely that, isn't it? Now, these three young guys, you know, out of that, you possibly become councillors, for argument's sake. But out of that, exceptionally, some of you guys go on to become parliamentary candidates in particular areas. But generally, out of that, as a result of what you've done, including research, organizations, activism, campaign against corruption, you know, anti-Chinese excesses on a road program somewhere, and you run with it, and maybe you even invited to Parliamentary Committee on Environment or Finance to give evidence as a youth activist from Nakaseke and all this kind of stuff, you know? And then your political party said, yeah, this guy, and then yes, you go to what they call the long list for a pot of parliamentary candidates. You qualify. So by the time you've gone to the National Assembly as a candidate, not only do you meet this, but actually already if it's UPC, we already know you that your niche is education, your niche is health, your niche is women activism and environment. In fact, your niche is the other because you ran with a particular project on women's abuse somewhere in north of Kampala City, and you become the party spokesperson on women and environment and possibly law and order, partly because of your crime and experiences. Those are the posts of leaders who then, when you emerge and then you go to the National Assembly, not only a member of parliament, that is how they consider which parliamentary committee you may go in. Do they support you there or do you apply? You'll apply to go to a parliamentary committee, not because one is lucrative because of trips, not because one is lucrative because there's dubious money for corruption, not one is lucrative because you'll carry the speaker's bag, even if you're a crooked man going with the heart to Qatar, but simply because you've got a net skill set to bring net contribution to that parliamentary committee. That is how it works in democracies. That's how it worked before this country, before Museveni came to power. That's worked in the last parliament of 1980 to 85. And it worked well, and we had mostly men, but of top-notch, top range. Do you know what? It is possible that we're able to experience this thing going forward. It is possible that a post-Museveni assembly, has been said, will pick from a pool of many Ugandans, because thankfully we are many in number Ugandans. After all, maybe a future UPC would suggest that we reduce the number of members of parliament so it becomes much more competitive, in which case then we end up with few, but very competitive men and women. But most importantly, if you don't mind, I think point that both of you guys raised, that you are legislating knowing very well that the country is looking at you, not impressing Mr. Museveni. But most importantly, you are legislating because you're completely convinced that you've got a burden of responsibility for your constituents. And in that way, it's possible for us to come out with decent men and women. At the moment, that's not the issue. That's not the case, unfortunately.
To our esteemed viewership, we now take a short break. We'll be right back.
National Water and Sewage Corporation is committed to providing cost-effective, clean, safe, and reliable quality water and sewage solutions in urban centers across Uganda. National Water and Sewage Corporation reaffirms its commitment to 100% service coverage, geographical expansion, infrastructure development, water quality, pro-poor initiatives, customer care and stakeholder engagement, catchment, and water source protection. Be a water hero. Pay your bills to zero balance. Report all leaks, busts, and illegal water connections to enable us serve you better. Reach us through our toll-free numbers on 0800 200 977 or 0800 300 977. You can also communicate with us through any of our online platforms or visit the National Water and Sewage Corporation office nearest to you. This message is brought to you by National Water and Sewage Corporation.
Welcome back from the break. This is the Focus on Parliament show on Civic Space TV. Today we are reflecting on the Parliament's performance for the year ending 2023. I am joined by a panel of distinguished personalities to discuss this topic. Mr. Joseph, I'm coming back to you. We understand from Article 79 of the Constitution that Parliament is the chief oversight player in the context of our constitutional democracy, if you like. But in this term, specifically in this year, we have witnessed, rather with deep consternation, events where the president is emasculating Parliament and in certain respects, compelling it to, agree with his stance and outlook on things. Lawel earlier on cited the now notorious monopoly question, the issue of the coffee monopoly, the oil monopoly. What is this that we are, witnessing? Has Parliament, lost the spine? Is it the question of its leadership? Is there no one to direct affairs properly? What could be the problem? Or the president, like he has repeatedly suggested, that he can even do away with it and just, govern?
You answered your question in a way, because your last observation is the most important. Mr. Museveni said that Parliament is his property. That was important. I didn't really want to take that line on this particular session, but in a way, while Lawel talks about three arms of state, meaning the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary, you are the fourth estate. So really, these four arms of government on our behalf as the peoples ought to be independent, ought to be critical, ought to be layers in their own respective ways, and ought to be able to offer checks and balances to all the others on behalf of the citizenry. In this case, when you find any of those ones, whether it's the media, even as a fourth estate, which is normally not taken seriously, being able to be compromised, and then the other arms rarely in space. Lowell tried to be very generous to the judiciary, and by and large, I don't know whether to agree with him or not. I just believe that I think the primary three are sort of like all the same, unfortunately, in the pockets of the executive. To the extent that we know that even the elections of speakers, which I argued substantially, should really be matters of left for members of parliament, it ends up being matters in which not only does the executive get involved, but the executive gets involved to the extent that Mr. Museveni personally, physically says that he has to make phone calls to tell people, ring, vote so and so, vote so and so, and of course with the evidence of people being given money. So then, if that's the case, it's not surprising, as I said earlier, that one, people who become members of parliament must, in many cases, be predominantly yes in NRA. And in this case, the role of a chief whip, I do not know what it is, but the role of a speaker, ideally, should be first amongst equals. As the presiding officer of parliament, the speaker should be the person who will have been elected by the majority of legislators on a cross-party basis, generally. In most democracies,
Ideally.
yes, and this is not, because Uganda is not a democracy. In most cases, members of parliament will look amongst themselves. I think we're having a conversation how these people came, and I think you're trying to, you put Winfred sort of on the spot. Who amongst us is experienced? Who amongst us is detailed in terms of depth? Who amongst us is fair? Who amongst us is objective? Who amongst us, all of us are, but who amongst us has a combination of many of these together with a temperament,
The
to be
disposition.
precisely to check this house. Those are qualities generally that members of parliament at individual levels and then therefore collectively in majority want to be able to zero on a legislator. I argued around the death of Jacob Olanya that particularly after the death of Jacob Olanya, there was no reason why this would not have been left as a free vote for parliament, instead of being whipped the manner in which Mr. Museveni whipped it. And that basically means that, look, in other parliaments, an opposition member could emerge. I'm not saying necessarily there's one in this case, emerge as the presiding officer of the National Assembly. After all, you emerge as a presiding officer of the National Assembly. The governing political party still has a caucus, and it's got a whip around which maybe they could push and whip their membership. In Uganda's case, the governing political organization has got a huge majority. That to even their majority be threatened by some dissenting few voices would be neither here nor there. So in other words, it would take a massive revolt of more than 100 members of parliament to revolt against a particular position, to put NRA position and status at risk. But because this is a dictatorship, except one dressed in parliamentary democracy, it's neither here nor there. I think that what is required is for us to take this bait next year onto the citizens of this country. I genuinely suggest that political parties across the country ought to begin to have national debates about the role of parliament and the role of parliamentarians in terms of their actions and activities. And that the more this debate takes place, the more we scrutinize what's going on in the National Assembly, the more hopefully then we will begin to have members of parliament who bring, even if they're private members' bill, but that they bring legislations or proposals, table bills that are not only relevant, but that are urgently of the interest of the membership. To the extent, as I said, that female members of parliament were whipped along Kampala Road, just not far from the National Assembly. And it was business as usual, and no members of parliament, say from the majority political organization, say no, and maybe perhaps ask for an emergency debate and perhaps take a position, and it didn't happen. I wonder, is it a house of doubt where people go for another hunting? I watched the other day a member of parliament hosting another member of parliament, and they're having a conversation. And I saw some of the pictures. And these guys, I don't want to spoil, they looked so out of place with their constituents and constituencies. But I said, look, these guys, they'll say they've been elected. They're enjoying the little bits of it. I am not happy at all about where we are at the moment. And I hope that next year, post-Christmas, people can go ahead reflect, review, pray. I hope that it is a Christmas soon next weekend, that people are able to even fast at least once for this country, and fast once at least for this parliament. And then as the year opens, we're able to start a year with new and different people. Many of these legislators, I think, as you take the thing at the beginning, are generally young people. Many of them are relatively educated, meaning schooled. All they need to do is to go back to Hansard. And all they need to do is to look at the members of parliament before them. As I said, just look at the 1980s parliament and the equality. Just talk about the speaker you put in, my sister, here on the spot. The last fantastic speaker is still alive, Francis Butagira. That was the UPC's speaker between 1980 and 85. No, that was Mr. Speaker. Rounded gentleman, he's a deputy, you think he's like a deputy pope in the National Assembly. But we had a very rigorous parliament. DP was big in that parliament, unlike the current official opposition. UPC was the majority, 61% or thereabout, but DP was a big parliament. At the same time, we're having big issues, including Lawel. In fact, DP used to throw all sorts of things around. So the debates used to be quite rigorous, So, but it was civil. I don't know which member of parliament was thrown. I don't know who Mr. Speaker ever abused. I don't know who Mr. Speaker threw stones at. And I don't know which member of parliament was whipped either inside parliament or outside parliament. It didn't happen. So no, I think we need to begin to take this seriously. And so you're absolutely right that we conclude this year with this review, because it's an important review. Don't forget, it's a big parliament, extremely expensive parliament, to the extent that the monies that allegedly go to look after the speaker's home and deputy speaker's home is more than a budget per capita that would possibly be equivalent of what his president's office those days, and all of which would have been accounted anyway for. Not this one.
Lawel, there is now the obstinate issue of human rights. And we understand that the parliament as the chief forum for and being the foremost amplifier for the people's voice is pretty much concerned with processes that are aimed at resolving such issues. This parliament, largely dominated by the NRM, has taken an indifferent, even I think in many respects, impassive attitude towards that question. It's either deflecting it to some other entity, or in the alternative, it claims that the opposition is just being it's engaging in infertile machinations and whatnot. In your view, going into 2024, we seem now to be at crossroads, because the speaker has called for a consultative meeting of all stakeholders involving the leader of the opposition, the chairperson of the Uganda Human Rights Commission, and herself and the deputy. But as we all know, it aborted last week. Do you see Parliament making any significant headway in as far as resolving the question of human rights, very sensitive as it is, for the health of the nation?
If opposition, leader of opposition and colleagues can hold foot, I think this is going to be a very defining issue for the NRM government. The little information I have is that, what we all know is that a lot of NUP and I think other activists and other members of opposition parties were kidnapped and tortured. We have had people who have been brought back, thrown in the bush, on the roads, or in Mulago, that have undergone severe torture. My suspicion that it is possible that some, because of intensive torture, could have even lost their lives within the torture chambers or wherever they were put. What then I don't know is if opposition can hold foot and say, we are not relenting until all the 18 are accounted for, what is government going to do about it? Because the implication of what the LOP has done is open our eyes as citizens to say, wow, there are these 18 people, we know them by names. There is no possible way you can resolve that standoff without producing those 18. And some might not even be dead, but they might be deformed or have been amputated. And I think that for me, if there's anything the opposition has done, because in this parliament, because of the numbers, quite often it is very hard for the opposition to win based a debate or a vote based on the numerical disparities. But I think that they can manage to ask those questions. And this is one of the big questions that I think if we continue to pay attention and the opposition can hold foot, is going to be defining. Because for most of the things, when you hear NRM Tharwat's talk, you could think that Uganda started in 1986, because they have managed to characterize those that came before them as people who didn't care about people, who were torturers, who did all these sorts of things. But I think for me, this contention strips them of that legitimacy and moral high ground. And so for me, from the background, I have at least worked with NUP from the human rights point of view to follow up on those people. And I know what those who were released, those who were arrested with some of the comrades that are missing, have to say about the experiences. And I see no way that this ends without these individuals coming out. What I also is underwhelming is the people who are defending government by saying, look, there are those who are who have gone into exile and they are demanding for them. But the question is, are there people who have indeed been abducted? Yes. So what do you have to say about those, even if you were to accept whatever you want to say as unscrupulous? What is your say? And quite often you listen to MPs, to ministers of internal affairs, talking about these things as if they are mild. But these are human beings we are talking about. And if there's anything that I have learned, and I think people should have learned it from Kaihura, is that tables always turn. If you do not protect the Constitution, if you don't protect human rights, not because it's NUP speaking, but anyone talking about the defense of human rights, tables are going to turn and you'll have no one to defend you. It's so that you're not really defending Chibarama's human rights per se, you're also defending yours. It's like insurance that I want to protect what I have, and the only way of protecting it is by having a vast structure upon which that entire right is protected. And so for me, I think, just to talk about it, I don't like how NRM and government people are defending their side. I think it is quite parochial and short-sighted. They ought to do better. But they also know that the government is in a catch-22, which they can't get out of. And the biggest disservice opposition can do for us is to change the modus operandi. And I think the Waganda people sent where you're touching, just tighten the belt. And I think that's what opposition should be able to do. They won't win votes on age limit, they want to vote on the monopolies, but at least they can say on this issue, we are not proceeding as if it's business as usual.
Do you mind me saying something before Winfred comes? That's actually very interesting. The mark of parliamentary democracy again is this, and you're absolutely right as a lesson and a message to the opposition, that actually in democracies, members of parliament, Uganda members of parliament ought to know that when matters of debate come into the House, the legislator friend with whom I was the other day, they've got this frame of mind, state of mind, which means that immediately matter comes to the floor of Parliament, they default to themselves. No, legislators' job is to legislate on the merit of the issues. The back of your mind, your constituents. Generally, if the majorly ideological issues, then that comes into the question of your party and the whippings. But generally, matters of conscience should be about individual members of parliament, individual citizens. And this is actually whether it's parliament or your councillors. The point is this, there, that in many of these, as you rightly say, up to and including actually age limit anyway, those kind of fundamental things, a member of parliament should be able to take a position and simply say, no, look, guys, this is something that, just like they did, as I said, that's the irony with anti-homosexuality legislation. It came from a member of opposition. How comes all NR guys followed like zombie? As a matter of conscience, because it was convenient to do so. So really, if a member of parliament says that, no, I move that from today on, our health and education budget should be doubled, and Museveni's and defense budget should be halved, and it's legislated. And then the 3% thing on the supplementary cut off. In fact, that's one credit I want to give them in case they actually effectively come up with. It should be supported across the house. And that is the test, this whole opposition's case. If you were to make your case, you should be able to taunt their luck. I mean, I'm not in that assembly. They should be able to taunt their colleagues individually. That you tell me that you don't support my bill that proposes that education and health budget should be doubled on this merit. Tell me no in the assembly, knowing very well that the national cameras are on you. I think the more they take that route, maybe the more personal it will be. But like I said before, this assembly is a little bit of a class away from the class that I know, which was the last UPC class. But I hope we can catch up together on that going forward in future.
Winfred, let us now interrogate the role of Parliament as an appropriation instrument of the state. Recently, the leader of the National Unity Platform, the majority opposition party in Parliament, the Honorable Kwagala, while addressing a press conference, threw a spanner in the works when he, alleged that he was kind of a ploy by the government to smuggle an item into the supplementary budget to accommodate for what he termed as a bribe to the MPs to help in the facilitation of the supplementary budget. This, in many respects, of course, taints the reputation of Parliament as a whole, much more so its leadership, because these processes, of course, are being presided over by the Speaker or the Deputy. What are your thoughts as a citizen, when you examine the efficacy of Parliament in properly appropriating the national resources to aid facilitate citizen service delivery?
One thing I've witnessed in Uganda, something starts like that. First of all, where did Kyagulanyi get the news? How did Kyagulanyi know that the MPs were going to be given 100 million? Yes. And many times we look at it, and sometimes, like how now the speaker said Kyagulanyi is talking lies, and sometimes we just go with that. So to me, I feel, first of all, is it the right time now for the Parliament to pass the supplementary budget? That runs in my head as a citizen. And then I ask myself, why would they even do that with all the other needs we have in place right now? And it takes me to, not to say that, yes, it's true, they got the 100 million, but again, the speaker also not coming out boldly with her boldness, the way she speaks boldly, to say that we have not received any 100 million. She didn't. She only said, Kyagulanyi is lying about us getting the 100 million as bribe for passing the what?
The supplementary budget.
Yes. Another question, because that is hanging. So they received the 100 million for what? And that is how other things are not planned for, because now giving out, if really they gave out the 100 million to the MPs, where does it leave the health sector? Where does it leave other infrastructures? It means that we are just going to be in the vicious cycle of borrowing. And again, when we borrow, they'll still have to misuse the money. Yes? So with all that is going on in the Parliament, of recent, I had the Minister of Health still asking for money for this hospital in Lawel. Yes? And I remember that hospital, there have been questions of whether that hospital is what?
60.
Yes. And if the Parliament is passing that money, as citizen, what do you want us to think? The truth is, to me, I would think, okay, then it's true. These people are getting bribes so that they can pass such kind of embezzle. Because if the hospital is not there, and the other parliament said we should stop giving money there until there's the accountability, and then you right now on the floor, you're approving that money, and then approving the supplementary budget. When did the budget was passed around June, July?
Yeah.
Yes, and we are in December. They are passing a supplementary budget. We have still a long way. So in February or March, they are going to pass what? So to me, I feel around planning and budgeting, like Lawel say that there's competency. There's some competency lacking. So what comes on the table, as long as it favors them and favors their position, they'll take it. And remember, these are the people who are supposed to plan for us. And where does it leave our country? So around there, the parliament is not doing well. And I would score them as 0. I would. Because playing with the taxpayers' money, yes, to me as a human rights defender, my enemy is anyone who plays with money of the citizens. Corruption, if you are involved around corruption, you're an enemy to the state, not only even to me, to the country. Anyone who is an enemy to progress is an enemy to everyone, and citizens should know that if parliament is not willing to be accountable or even fight corruption, they are our enemies as citizens who elected them. So in that bit of them getting 100 million, they should prove it. Not just the speaker standing up and warning this Kyagulanyi going there because, and the reason she gave, because Kyagulanyi ate anti-homosexual money, that is why she's trying to hide over this. No, I want the speaker to stand up and say, Kyagulanyi, you are lying. We have not gotten any money. Prove. And maybe Kyagulanyi can come out to prove. But again, when you come and then you want, because they know, like Lawel said, that even if they took the Anti-Homosexuality Act and asked people to vote, they would vote against positive about it. Now the speaker is using the psychology of, when I tell the people that Kyagulanyi received money from the homosexuals, that is why Kyagulanyi is lying that we got 100 million, people will believe me. Let her stand up and tell us that they didn't receive my money. Let her not be, because when Kyagulanyi was talking about the 100 million, Kyagulanyi didn't say any word around homosexuality. Kyagulanyi didn't say that they received this 100 million to make sure that the Anti-Homosexuality Act stays. Kyagulanyi did say that. Why does the speaker now has to lean over something he knows that she knows, because according to them, it is the people who told them to vote to bring back the bill. So why is she leaning on the Anti-Homosexuality Act, saying that Kyagulanyi, let her tell us whether they received money or not, and if they received, for what? Her reasoning around there still of the 100 million. As a citizen, I sit down and say, okay, every time there is something, they're now going to be every time taking us to what they think all citizens do, what? Support. As a citizen, I feel maybe they received the money. That is why they can't tell us. They want us to take us back to the other act, which is now in court. They don't even know to. I don't believe. I am not a lawyer. I've not done anything around legal. But what I grew up knowing, that once a case is in court, you don't have to debate about it. But I'm seeing at the very same time, the parliament is bringing back the same thing which is in court. Right now, that case is in court. They are telling them they received 100 million. Let them tell us whether they received it or not. And then also let them tell us why they had to approve their supplementary bill early, right now. It gets people to question themselves. Let them not leave. The speaker needs to start not leaving a room for us to question. But whenever she leaves a room for us to question, we will question. And the problem, she doesn't have She doesn't have the, how do they call it, the capacity or the to control herself.
The temperament.
Yes,
Self-restraint.
she doesn't have that. She will come up with that energy,
Mm.
but we shall still
And
question.
language.
Yes.
Mr. Joseph, share your views on the justification for the supplementary budget, and especially in light of Honorable Chagulanyi's damning allegations that an item, an addendum, was smuggled in to accommodate for the 100 million bribe that is going to be channeled to the MPs in order to smoothly facilitate.
There's no justification. There's no justification. And if you ask me seriously, with the exception of the fact that apparently Parliament itself legislated on the so-called 3% for which the executive has got a leeway to spend and then come back and get the money back as get the money back and get clearance from Parliament, which is basically loopholes, a thieving loophole. It is criminal. If you look at all the items, all the items listed for this, none of them was unforeseen. Absolutely none. Not one single one is unforeseen, which is supplementary. What supplementary should be for. Number two, as Winfred says, the last budget was in July. What kind of thinking incapacities do we have in this regime? Starting with Mr. Museveni, who studied economics and political science. What kind of thinking capacities? By them challenging him directly, what kind of thinking capacity do you have as head of state? Because you cannot tell us that these budgetary drafts are done and sent to the National Assembly without him having.
No, he's the chief finance minister
by law. Precisely, the chief finance officer. So what? This guy who allegedly wasted our money in Dar es Salaam or UPC, if only it was not that, this man thankfully would not have gone beyond Barara. But he studied anyway and wasted our money in Dar es Salaam. So how could he not be able to do so? What about his almost thieving minister for finance? What was he? So who are the planners in this regime? And who are the people whom we pay as advisors, special advisors in this regime that you do not project? Because part of a role of government in terms of budget project, you do projections, you do forecasts, and all of us have done this, and many of us also do these things in our homes. You know that next week I'll spend so much on fuel, next week I'll spend so much on water, next week I'll spend so much on board, and next week I'll spend so much on bujera, and then indeed, by the way, in the next 3 weeks there may be opportunity for us to go to put money in for school fees. Do we save per week on the basis of what we earn or not? So quite clearly that is what it is. Do you know what? It is the case that as Chagulanyi suggests, that the supplementary has been used by the state to conveniently manufacture money from citizens. I think on this program about a year ago, a young legislator promised us and promised me, including off air, that they're going to push for legislative changes to put a block onto this 3% anomaly that Mr. Museveni uses to manufacture money for himself and his dubious operations, maybe including for bribing legislators, and maybe part of the money that goes back into the pockets of people whom he uses as agents of patronage. Part of the problem is that if maybe he was using this money to people who then go ahead and serve the Republic of Uganda, however informally, it would be okay. But in many cases, it's actually patronage to sustain a regime which is basically a failed system. Do you know, I don't know any country where you would ask for supplementaries 3 times. I don't know of any country where you would ask for supplementaries twice in a year. As I said, emergencies, that contingency, basically this contingency funds, and you put it at 3.5 trillion shillings. That's a huge amount of money. It's a huge amount of money. And yet we are amongst the highly most indebted countries on earth. And yet we're a country for which there is no evidence, you can't project in the last 5 years, that what exactly have most of the money has been put beyond paying debt servicing have we gone to? What are the real, because again, I'll come back to the key usual public needs really, which is basically health. My sister is here to talk about Loboa and the ghost Loboa, which Museveni himself is involved with a coffee drinking Italian, and talk about education what is it? These days you have people who complete university degrees. They can't write essays on one page. They can't write 400 words without making a mistake. So I think there's impunity in this country. I think Mr. Museveni is riding us into the direction of impossible return when he leaves. That whoever comes, I know again of air, a colleague was talking about whether or not we will be able to repair this country post Mr. Museveni. I think that is incumbent upon legislators, unfortunately, who are being used for this particular monies to not only put a check on spending, but of course, as I said, the Parliament, which is supposed to be checking particularly the executive and the judiciary, but one which you've been told that the head of the executive is seeing it as his equipment and is able to control it remotely. We are in a very different state as a nation state.
What's your take on the concept of classified expenditure?
It is urgently, badly needs to be reviewed. The amount of money in a classified budget, you ask yourself, how much of it is that and what does it do? I think citizens have got a right to know roughly. In other countries, we got this right honorable. I know here in Museveni, in Uganda, we use many of these things, and Museveni imports some of them. We actually have right honorables who are supposed to be, in British case where we pick these things, supposed to be what they call privy councillors. People who've got special access to state secrets, and they live with them. They will be able to see secrets from the Queen. There's certain things about the state at a cabinet level, so they become right honorables. Right honorables should be able to see these things. So if we have right honorables in this country who cannot explain these things in a language good enough not to expose the extremes in terms of, in our case, would be merely national security, then what is it for? I think there's a cabal of guys who came from Lawel, managed putting themselves, and they're thieving themselves over 40 years and beyond, and we are in a state in which we have got no return. These are things that Parliament, but a Parliament with a teeth, should seek to legislate on so that we're able to review. Either the proportion of that is substantially reduced, if at all, and talk about it actually. Really,
You mean the 3% threshold?
I think the 3% threshold should be abolished, if not to be reviewed in such a manner that you can't pull it from, you can't go ahead and spend any money and come back and explain it. Oh, it was through supplementary, we are allowed to spend 3%, and then the 3% to spend is 1% or Drake Robogo to America to go and talk nicely to our other friend. Or another part of the 3% was to buy 70 suits, and part of the other one was to pay to calm down Muslims in old Kampala. And then the other bit of the 3% was to go and send my granddaughter to go and give me extra grandchildren in Germany. And because we are allowed to do so, it's justified. It should not be as simplistic as that. Legislators should be able to put a block into that, and it shouldn't happen because it's basically open public abuse. And if they don't put a stop to it, then as my sister says, maybe we need to organize a revolution in this country, a youth revolution in this country, to reclaim your country and make sure that you say any legislator who does not go with you guys in tune with the position for reclaiming your country and reclaiming your money and reclaiming your exchequer, meaning your budget, and reclaiming control of what a parliament should be able to do. They should be seen as traitors and enemies of this country, and they should be stopped.
Lawel, as we conclude, reflecting on the Parliament's performance for the year 2023, going into the new year, 2024, what are your expectations? In a minute, as you also give your parting shot.
I don't know what you mean by my expectations. I think it is French history where the king learned nothing and forgot nothing, therefore repeated the mistakes of those that had come before him. The last parliament, a lot of complaints as well, but the situation keeps deteriorating, that you cannot expect the graph to change direction. Yes. So it remains really, it gets worse. I think for me, on the appropriation, when you walk in Kampala, and I think that the rain has done what the fourth estate should be doing by exposing the absence of government. When you look at the supplementary budget, you look at, for example, the 13 billion given to artists, and I'm not saying they're not deserving of having a share, but you look at the priorities of the country, that you're forcing a supplementary budget to give artists 13 billion. You know that it's a problem. You cannot say that we really want to listen to music so much. We're dancing to what? It's not like this country is so entertaining, or that we have finished our basic necessities of life, that now we need money to celebrate and dance and feel good about the music. So for me, when you look at the supplementary budget, even if we were not to amend the act so that they can use money and come and account, even if they had that leverage, the question is, what are they doing with it? And so how do I interact with this government and this parliament? Is I walk from Kampala, from Sapolo, Kwagala Road to industrial area, Namugongo, wherever I walk, I see the problem before me, and that there is no priority, and it's just so bad that for you to expect a lot next year is to expect too much. But I hope that I don't like, as a person in my personal space and life, I don't like to be negative, honestly. It's just that when you're talking about focusing on parliament, the facts before you don't allow you to be positive. So you can only sound as if you're someone. I have a friend who calls it reading from the Book of Lamentations. But I hope that with this kind of space, focus on parliament, with the discussion we are having, we can always be able to talk about what is happening in other countries, what ought to be done, so that there's a constant reminder of the young and even the old that are aspiring to take up leadership, that there are best practices somewhere and we know them, that we should be able to do this when we get in charge. My problem is that oftentimes when the situation is so bad, the population ends up electing a successor who is an extremist, and sometimes it's also not good for our society. I hope that we shall have the power, the influence to manage the transition in such a way that it works for most of us.
I am glad, Lawel, and I agree with your sentiment that we should not read from the Book of Lamentations, but rather from the Book of Acts. Winfred, I come to your closing remarks on this show.
I share the same with Lawel. I don't have an expectation. It's like sending back a wife to a marriage where they've been beating her and you expect good from it. So I don't expect much. I expect more circus because they have resorted to our parliament is more of a theater. So I just expect more drama. I only have a call to action to the member of parliament. That is the only thing I can ask them. But me expecting from them with what they've shown from when they were elected, no, I would be lying to myself. I would be even wanting myself to either get a heart attack. So I don't expect the best from them. But I just call a call to action to them to do better, to feel for this country, to do like how they've done the opposition people, how they've done on this last bit of asking for people who are abducted. Let them also do better on accountability. Let them do better on other things like health, medical. Everyone is coming from a constituency which has issues. Can they in this next year, can they focus on the issues in their constituencies to see that the livelihood of different persons we have a sustainable development? So I just have a call of action to them, but me expecting from them, I expect them to do better. Let them feel for us the people on the ground.
Thank you much, Winfred, for your views.
I'm just worried that 2024 will be a year to the elections, which is basically election charade, basically. And so very likely we might be seeing more money going into areas that we don't expect and that are not priorities, but basically to cover up people's eyes and people's faces. I am worried that considering how legislators, majority of whom are supposedly elected, some of them actually end up being much more yes to the executive because they want to be backed into the primaries, which is really 12 to 18 months next time around. I hope that is actually not the position. To the extent that in my own constituency, a number of two councillors were actually arrested recently for siding with the people in a demonstration for demonstration against bad roads. Basically, people were demanding for tarmacking of the Gongera Toro Road, and citizens joined in, and councillors went and they arrested and detained, and some local politicians or people in politics, I'm not sure the people in politics, were making a lot of noise, one of whom includes an elected legislator who claims that it was wrong for the citizens to demonstrate because they know Mr. Museveni has promised to tarmac this road, promised to tarmac this road, and if Mr. Museveni hears that you people have demonstrated, he will be annoyed and he will change his mind. So that is from a very senior legislator from my sub-region. You know, I was sick that evening and have been sick since that day. I'm looking forward to meeting that legislator who should be someone with whom we're able to sit and have cups of tea. That is the nature of the issues of politics we have. I hope that more people from Nagongera and across this country rise up and come to demonstrate, knowing very much it's one of their most basic rights to demonstrate without breaking rocks, demonstrate without beating people or spoiling cars, demonstrate for and demand for roads, demand for better health services, demand for education, demand against corruption, and demand for fairness, and demand for return to constitutionalism, and demand that people who are missing and who are being tortured unlawfully, are returned, and the rule of law is returned, and demand that unless that happens, many of the legislators who are sitting and watching you will not be returned to Parliament. I think if people take that posture, particularly led by you, majority young people, going back beyond Kampala and saying this is the position and this is what we're going to do, many of these guys are capable of changing. Some of them are actually really cowards. I know a few of them who are cowards.
I want to appreciate you, lady and gentlemen, for taking off time to join us for this conversation, and of course, indeed, for your very insightful views. To our viewership, today's edition marks the end of the Focus on Parliament show for the year 2023. We appreciate you once again for your loyalty and for your engagement. Feel free to engage us further on our social media platforms, on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram. And of course, we wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New 2024. Be blessed.